website, they have all sorts of pictures, and a lot of those people are hideously ugly, and they're clearly Mongoloids. Definitely a problem. The further east you go in Russia, I think it's a lot better along the Baltic coast, the St. Petersburg area, Karelia, and then into the Ukraine. Cossacks kept the Turks at bay. When you start to get into the Moscow area or the Urals, it gets really bad. And I think that the sheer level of corruption in Russia could be seen as indicative of some sort of admixture issue, since typically white people aren't that violent and they're not that corrupt, are they, Bill?
Well, you know something? In all white nations, corruption is practically non-existent.
I mean, if you look at where corruption is mostly an issue, they identify countries like Belarus, Ukraine, Greece, Sicily, Turkey, Iran, Nigeria, and those nations either are outright non-white in the case of Nigeria, or they have huge issues in the case of Greece. You know, I got into an argument with some Greek guy who said that Greece is 100% white today, aside from immigrants, and said that my guess is that white people in Greece are less than 10% of the population, maybe 15% at most, but Greece of today is not the Greece that gave us Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato. That Greece hasn't given us those sort of men for the last 2,000 years.
Right, and I'm sure there's probably some whites left in the mountainous regions of Greece. However,
like Macedonia.
I would, well, Macedonia, no, that's all Slavic, actually. Yeah, you know, those people that call themselves Macedonians today, they are not Macedonians. And this is the proof of what conditioning in the educational system can do in 2 generations or 3 generations. The Slavs, and all the way back in the days of the Bulgars, basically pushed most of the Greeks out of Macedonia. Okay, the 6th, 7th, 8th centuries A.D., the Slavs took over the entire Balkan region. Now and they've dominated it ever since, except for the coming of the Turks, right? But when the Turks took large swaths of it and converted people to Islam, and the Albanians are basically Turks, and several other groups. Well, the Slavs of Macedonia, when the Soviets came, the Soviets pulled off a campaign to convince the Slavs of Macedonia that they are the actual heirs of the ancient Macedonian heritage. And they rewrote all the school books, and they convinced these people they were Macedonians, they were the descendants of Philip and Alexander, and they believed it ever since. And I've also met people from Macedonia, and I've told them they were Slavs, and they've gotten offended. I'm like, you're not a Greek, you're a Slav. And they've gotten kicked off at me.
I saw a girl from Macedonia in one of my college classes, and she was blonde, but she looked like she just came out of St. Petersburg or Moscow. She didn't look like a classic Greek. She looked like a Russian Slav. Very pretty, though, definitely white. But it doesn't make her a Greek.
I'd go for it.
Don't get like Joe Pennsylvania now.
I don't hit on people in here.
Well, yeah, the Macedonians of today are of a mostly Slavic stock. I have met blonde, blue-eyed, non-Slavic Greeks, however. Most of the Greeks that I've met kind of look like Jews. I've met Greeks that look like Irishmen, and I've met Greeks that look like Jews.
All the Greeks I've interacted with, they're at Greek food restaurant places or cafes selling their Greek food, and they're all short, maybe 5'2", fat, balding, greasy looking. They almost look as brown as Mexicans or Saudis, and they all have hooked noses. And I'm thinking, I don't remember Plato describing Greeks like this, and I've read Plato.
Well, when you look at the Homer, when you read Homer and you read Hesiod, and you look at the actual sculptures that the Greeks left behind, there wouldn't be any of them that were out of place in Scandinavia, right, or in Ireland.
Sure. I mean, the idea that that there's a Mediterranean people and that some swarthy olive-skinned individuals founded Greece and Rome, that's all just a modern lie.
Well, right. There's basically that the Mediterranean people is basically an invention of the politically correct sociologists of recent times.
So they're bad to be Slovenian.
Is it bad to be Slav? Well, you could be a Slav or you could be a German if you're Slovenian. You're probably a Slav. That doesn't make you bad. I mean, there are white Slavs, I'm convinced.
And the fact remains, the
The East Slavs were pretty much overrun by the Mongols. Now, the Slavs of southeastern Europe were pretty much overrun by both the Mongols and the Turks. And I'm talking about the Bulgars, the Romanians, those people. They've been overrun by the Mongols and the Turks. And they're pretty much mixed now.
My great-great-grandfather was a fisherman on the Mediterranean Sea. He lived in Slovenia.
Yeah, so he had a port of call probably in the very northern Adriatic. That doesn't mean that he was that doesn't mean he's mixed. He could very well have been a legitimate Slav. And in fact, he probably was at that time.
I've encountered some individuals who claim to be the descendants of Anatolian Greeks who came here from Turkey in the 20s to flee the persecution. That just means they're Turks or Jews that claimed to profess a view in
Yeah, well, there's probably as many real authentic Anatolian Greeks in the world today as there are real Philistines.
Well, where do we find the Philistines?
Where do you find the Anatolian Greeks?
In a history book.
Well, that's where you'll find the Philistines. Inscribed on the walls of the Pharaoh Nefertita.
If the Israelites of today are us, the Caucasians, it seems to me that all of the Hittites and the Canaanites and all those other Old Testament races of people are still here with us. We just don't know who they are, but they know who they are, and they know who we are.
Well, it's if you're not white, you're mixed, right? I mean, there's no doubt about it.
I read online, they said that most of the genetics present in Sicily, that they had a lot of haplogroup, I think it said J, and then another one that said that they're all common in North Africa and the Middle East. They estimated 70% of Sicilians have DNA consistent with Middle Eastern origins. It says wide DNA haplogroups found in the following frequencies: R1, 30% J, 29% E1, or E1B1B, 18.21% I, 762
Good night, Ferlin.
G, 593, K2, 551, and Q, 2.54.
Well, yeah, but just because somebody has haplogroup R, that doesn't make them pure. It doesn't mean that they don't have an admixture. Now, the haplogroup, I believe, only signifies a descent from a certain other group, but it doesn't signify that the bearer of the haplogroup is a pure member of that certain other group. You see what I mean?
For instance, sure, J, 80% of the people in Yemen have J.
Well, yeah, right. Haplogroup J is definitely Canaanite in origin. I would say Canaanite, Edomite in origin, without a doubt.
And they're finding 30% of Sicilians have group J. Well, that means it's a tainted province.
I would have thought that the percentage in Sicily would have been higher than that, to be honest with you. I'm surprised it's that low.
And then E1, B1B, which comes out of East Africa, and they found 18% of that in Sicily.
And these are all Y chromosome haplogroups? I mean, markers? Paternal?
DNA.
Oh, okay.
But if this is the case, if we accept those people as white and make marriage with them, they may look white, but you go back 400 years and you have a Turk in the family tree.
Yeah, they're not. I knew this fella from Stormfront, his best friend. He was a reddish-brown haired, and he was Sicilian, but his brother looked like a mulatto. Like, there was some definite...
Well, that could just be the mother wasn't faithful. If you're white and your wife's white and she hands you a mulatto baby and says, gee, here's your son, that's when you get a DNA test and probably a divorce.
He didn't look full mulatto, but he had more, like, Negro features than the brother. I think it's because they were Sicilian. Like, he didn't look like, LeBron James.
Well, that's, usually when people ask me, how do I know if I'm okay, I usually tell them that the best thing to do is collect up your family pictures, and if your kids and your siblings look like your grandparents did when they were kids, and they all generally look the same, then you should probably have nothing to worry about. But if you have that, like you just said, if in every generation there's one kid that looks like something fell out of the woodpile, well, that usually indicates that there's something in the woodpile. And since none of us have a guarantee of racial purity, then that between our general appearance and the appearance of our siblings and our brethren are going to have to gauge us by our actions.
Sure, judge them by the fruits.
And that's what it boils down to.
Productive members of the community working for righteousness as opposed to throwing stones and slandering and bombarding people with turds, then
Right.
pretty secure.
Unless you know somebody is a stranger, you can only judge them by their fruits. That's what it boils down to.
I heard somewhere that people with blue eyes all originated from Norway. Is that true?
Oh, well, you
That
know,
could be
that,
true.
that can't be true because Norwegians didn't originate from Norway.
And there are records of people in Greece and Persia having blue eyes. And those
There
places
were records of
populated.
blue-eyed people in Mesopotamia circa 2500 BC. They had eyes, as the texts say, like lapis lazuli, which was a blue mineral. There are records of Egyptian scribes and pharaohs having blue eyes circa 2500 BC. I mean, to say that all blue-eyed... You know, the Jew is trying to purposely distort history to continually count for his own legitimacy. So stop paying attention to Jewish history or to Jewish statements concerning evolution and genetics, because it's all bullshit.
So, Bill, how do you respond to Negroes that claim they were Egypt? Or you don't?
I just laugh at them.
And then they try and cite the fact there were a few black pharaohs in the end times in Egypt, weren't there?
Well, yeah, Nubians overran Egypt in the 7th century, 8th century BC. They held it for 50 to 75 years, and they're even though the Egyptians eventually took the throne back from them, that the
Country was
Egyptians
ruined.
never really got rid of the blood. Right, the country was basically on its way to ruin.
They're trying to claim that people that are inhabiting Somalia today are the people who were in Egypt 4,000 years ago and built the original kingdom and the pyramids. And I'm saying that they were slaves imported.
Oh, well, I mean, there's a million arguments against it, Brian. I mean, there's a million arguments against it. What have they built since? Why haven't... If blacks came from the sub-Saharan regions into Africa, and from Africa into Egypt, and created this culture, why didn't they create that culture in the sub-Saharan regions? I mean, we moved across the ocean to Australia and to America, and we created European culture, and we'll create European culture wherever we go.
Sure. I mean, we can go to the moon and we'll turn the moon into Little Italy or Little Germany or Little Spain, Little France, Little Britain.
Absolutely. Well, we create European culture again.
But you look at what the blacks did, and that's what I asked. I said, how come these same Somalians then south of the Great Desert Divide were eating each other? If their cousins just north of the sands were building pyramids, why couldn't they build pyramids in the Congo?
Well, that's my point. Yeah, you know, I tell this story all the time. You know, some Negro once, and he used to like to pass himself off as an educated Negro. He lived next door to me in prison for several years, and one day he told me that Greek culture came from Africa, from the blacks, and the alphabet and the mathematics and all that. And I looked at him and I said, well, then how come when the white men met you in the 1500s, you did not have an alphabet? And he looked at me and he said, that's because you stole it from us.
It's not like
How do you steal an alphabet?
I mean, yeah, I could.
You know, you can't argue with somebody that does not have the intellectual capacity to realize that he's wrong. You cannot convince an incompetent person that he's incompetent because the incompetent person does not have the skills to realize that he's incompetent. It's not possible. And every Negro is incompetent, and you're never going to successfully argue with one of them. Please go argue with the wall. You'll do better.
I had heard that ones and zeros first originated with the Indians.
Well, that's ridiculous. Everyone.
Well, that's that's revisionist history on the part of the Libyans, right? Of the liberals, right? Because the Indians never had anything but one, many, or zero. None, one, or many. That's the only three mathematical concepts they ever had.
And
So now they're being credited with inventing the binary system, right? Only a moron would fall for that.
I was taught that the Assyrians were the ones who pioneered what we know as modern mathematics.
Well, the Assyrians were white.
Absolutely. Although we were basically taught that the people that are living there now are the same ones who were there 4,000 years ago, and I don't believe that.
But, well, right. Well, only an idiot can believe that, because the Arabs, it's very clear in history, the Arabs overran the entire Parthian, Persian world in the 6th and 7th centuries BC, and converted them all by the sword to Islam,
And then mixed with them.
and then mixed with them.